Aberdine. I'm the Director of Marketing at ALULA. Today's webinar topic is one that we're asked about frequently, and that's creating and leading high-performing teams. Our facilitator today is Kim Huggins, and she's a partner here at ALULA. I'd like to mention a few housekeeping items first. All phone lines will be muted during the course of the webinar, except at about the halfway point, we may unmute if we see that there are questions coming in. We would like to encourage you to interact with us through the use of the chat or the Q&A features on the right-hand side of your WebEx screen, and we'll be monitoring the questions as they come in, and we'll ask as many as we can during the last minutes of the webinar. If for some reason we run out of time, we'll answer any remaining questions and send the answers to everyone in a follow-up email. So let's get started. I'll now turn the session over to Kim Huggins.
Great. Thanks, Jamie, and hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to speak with you on this topic. Leadership today is very challenging, and so I think we'll have some great things to share with you. As I was preparing for this, I was thinking back to many years ago in my career. I was in the corporate world myself, and I was working for a large pharmaceutical company, and I was promoted into a position for the first time where I had a team of people working for me. And the team was pretty diverse. They had varying responsibilities. I had people on the team reporting to me that were older and more experienced than me. I had an individual on the team that had a lot of health issues. And I remember having a conversation with my dad, and he asked me how things were going with the new role. And I said to him, wow, I didn't realize how much time I was going to spend, on managing the people reporting to me. And he shared something with me that has stuck throughout my career. And he said, Kim, you have to spend time to save time. And I think this is something that certainly still holds true today. When you think about it, time is our most valuable commodity. And as a leader, by making small investments of quality time, it can really save you from making larger investments of critical time later. We've all seen the research, probably heard many times that people leave positions and companies often because of the individual leader that they're working for. And as a leader, what you do and say really matters. Your behavior has a direct connection to engagement, productivity, and ultimately to business results. So it really is a critical role. A couple weeks ago, I was speaking at a conference on this topic to senior level leaders in the pharmaceutical and healthcare industries, and we were in a large venue, and we ran a poll, and we asked them, how much time per week do you spend leading your team? And I thought the results were pretty interesting. I'll share them with you now. So you can see here that 45%, so almost half of the people said that they spend less than 20% of their time leading their team. And, I thought afterwards, wow, I was kind of surprised by that. I thought it'd be a little bit higher, that people would say, they spent more time. I wasn't quite prepared for half of them to say that they spent less than 20% of their time. And I thought back to a conference that I had attended earlier in the summer where there was a speaker who was talking about leadership, and he made the comment that he spent 70% of his time on leadership and culture. And there was like an audible gasp in the room when he said that. People, I think, were really surprised that he was spending that much time. And so it really got me curious to do some further digging and, what is the right amount of time, or is there a right amount of time? And certainly, the time will fluctuate based on the business and what's going on and the individual leader. But interestingly enough, we found some research that said there is a bit of a sweet spot for time spent with your team. And this study was conducted, a survey of over 32,000 people by a research firm. And they asked how much time, they asked the respondents to estimate how many hours per week they were spending with their direct leaders. And the study showed that 3 hours was the median time that people spent with their leaders. And what they found was that if you spend too little time, your employees tend to be disengaged. If you spend too much time, you could be micromanaging. But what the other thing they found is that in most cases, more time with the boss is a good thing. And as people rose from 1 hour to 6 hours spent with their direct leaders, there was some interesting impact to that. What the study found was that when they spent that amount of time, those 6 hours, individuals were 30% more engaged and more likely to recommend their company as a great place to work. They were 29% more inspired about the work that they were doing. They were more creative and innovative, and they were more motivated. They were more interested in the work that they were doing. So I think that just goes to show that that investment of time can really have a significant impact on the individuals on your team, as well as ultimately the results that you drive in your business. At ALULA, we've done our own research around leadership, and this is our Q4 leadership model, we call it. And so I'd like you to just think about, for the next few minutes as I walk through this model, what type of leader are you? Our research indicates that the strongest leaders find a way to encourage exceptional and sustainable results and do it in a way that creates a high degree of inspiration and even passion among the people working for them. Oops, let me go back one here. So we all know that it's hard to find that perfect balance, right? And a perfect balance is not necessarily needed, but the right balance of the what, which is driving results, and the how, which is keeping your team engaged, is really critical. Leaders who are able to strike this right balance are able to create amazingly productive work environments and to drive a level of discretionary performance. That level of performance where people consistently go above and beyond to really help create the environment and get the results that you need. So let's take a look at each one of these Q leaders and understand a little bit more about them. So the Q1 leader, this leader is the least likely to create an environment of discretionary performance. This leader typically does not set clear direction. They have problems giving feedback. Their work environment's just not collaborative or energetic, and therefore the results that they get are inconsistent and variable. They're a little bit of a hot mess, you could say, the Q1 leader. And these leaders usually don't last very long in the organization. They either choose to leave the organization themselves or the organization helps them make that decision. Q2 leaders are able to build strong relationships and create a very positive work environment. However, they don't focus on or achieve the superior results, so often their goals are missed. They typically have difficulty requiring full compliance, and they may avoid issues or not address issues because they don't want to upset the people that are working for them. So while people typically enjoy this type of leader and they like the type of environment that they create, the leader is not able to get those business results that are needed. Now, the Q3 leader, on the other hand, they are definitely a driver of results. However, the results that they achieve are usually short-term and inconsistent. And they're able to demand those results based on their authority. Typically, they're very compliance-driven, and so people perform, but they perform more out of fear of what will happen if they don't perform, and therefore they're not as productive as they really have to be. And then we have the Q4 leader, and this Q4 leader is able to strike that right balance. They create an environment that results in sustainable performance and results, They bring out the best in people. We probably worked on teams like this or have seen teams like this in your organizations where it just people really want to be a part of it. They're curious to know what's going on over there. People seem to be really enjoying what they're doing. They're highly engaged. They're passionate and committed to what they're doing, and they're achieving the business results that are needed. So those are the four quadrants. I want to share with you a client situation with one of our clients from a few years back. And this client was a multinational client which had transitioned from a government-held to a public entity. And they were going through a significant organizational transformation and trying to really continue their position as number one in the industry. In addition, they were going through a lot of acquisition activity, and they were trying to integrate a lot of different companies and cultures. There was a change in the CEO. Their competition was increasing. Their workforce was aging, and this was an industry that was not attracting younger talent. It wasn't really considered a cool industry, so they were struggling with really succession planning and bringing in the next generation of leaders. And the CEO realized that in order for them to stay number one, they had to really fundamentally change their culture. And he also recognized that the changes had to really start at the top and with leaders throughout the organization. But as they started to explore further the leadership within their culture, they found that there were two unhealthy leadership styles, that had developed over time. They had Q3 leaders who were really dominating the top of the house. These leaders were tough. They were good at getting short-term results. They were knowledgeable about the business, but their style was really to demand compliance. So they created employees that were not happy, who did the minimum necessary required and not much more than that. And while they delivered results, they had highly disengaged team members. They also had Q2 leaders who were permeating the frontline supervisor role. They tended to give in to employee requests just so that they could make employees happy and keep the peace. They couldn't deliver the results. And these leaders were often promoted from the ranks without very much training in how to be a good supervisor or manager. And often they were managing their teammates who were also their friends. And when they needed to hold people accountable, the only role models these Q2 leaders had were the Q3 leaders above them. And they knew what it felt like to be on the receiving end of Q3 leadership, and they did not want to lead that way. So this organization had some challenges from a leadership standpoint, and they knew that it was, directly related to their culture, and that they really needed to make a shift in their culture and their leadership to get people from those, Q2 and Q3 leaders to Q4 leaders. And, when we talk about culture and our definition of culture, we see it as a pattern of behaviors that get encouraged or discouraged by people, processes, and systems over time. And so making this type of change does take time. And so you have to really work on, what type of leaders they really wanted to be and what leading the right way looked like. So what they did was they defined those Q4 leader behaviors starting at the top. They provided, support for those leaders in the way of education, coaching, and tools. And they gave each leader the opportunity to really start, in their own place and progress at the speed that they needed. And with a lot of hard work, many of those leaders were able to transition to Q4. As I said, that really takes place over a period of a few years. But the company really was able to see that when they were able to shift more of their leaders to demonstrating Q4 leadership, that link between leadership and business results became very obvious. So they saw some significant impacts to those business results and their transformation in their stock and their revenue. and in maintaining their number one status in the industry. So let me just stop and take a pause here, maybe open up the line, see if we have any comments or questions so far. Are we unmuted? Okay, I think we are. Does anyone have any comments or questions so far?
Yeah, so Kim, one question did come in, and this was around the time spent with direct reports. She wants to know, do you have any advice or examples of how leaders can increase their time spent with direct reports when there's so many pressing priorities requiring attention?
Yeah, great question. I mean, that's definitely a challenge for leaders today. There's just so much going on. I would say a couple of things. One is to really take a good look at how you're spending your time and what you're spending your time on, and see where are there opportunities for you to delegate, making sure that you're delegating the right types of things. And then the other thing I would suggest is, blocking time on your calendar so that you have that time carved out, and you can save that time, and your people know that there are certain times during the week that you're available for them to either meet with you or for you to have one-on-one meetings. So just a couple of quick thoughts there, but I know that can certainly be a challenge. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Well, let me move on then and talk to you about a framework that you as leaders can use for creating and leading high-performing teams. And we call this our DeCon Model. This model was actually, again, something that we developed a few years back. One of our clients had come to us and said that they needed some help understanding more about their competition and why their competition was consistently a top quartile performer, and they weren't. So we decided to expand that research and look across industries at companies that had sustainable top quartile performance and really find out, what those companies were doing that was generating that high performance. And what we identified was those organizations had 4 core things in place that they did consistently well. And the first one was direction. There was clear direction in the organization. So employees were able to answer the question, I know what I should do and why. The second area was competence. So within the organization, there was the knowledge and skills to do the work. The third was opportunity. The resources and the tools were available. And then the last one was motivation. So people were getting reinforced for doing the right things. And what we found is that without direction, competence, and opportunity, it makes it really difficult. People just can't perform if they don't have those things in place. But without motivation, people really just won't perform. They don't want to perform. And so let's talk a little bit more about what's a part of each of those components. So direction, beyond just having things in place like mission, values, metrics, these companies had also taken the time to behavioralize their values. So besides just having the values communicated, they really also shared what those values looked like when they're being demonstrated across the organization. And in addition to that, they really focused on the critical few priorities. And I think this is a big challenge that we see in many of our clients now. There are just so many priorities and concerns in organizations that it makes it really difficult for employees to understand where they should be focusing their time. These organizations really focus on what the critical few is and then getting those things done really well before moving on to others. In terms of competence, it's beyond just having, the technical skills and abilities to do the work. These organizations also are really good at ensuring that collaboration, especially cross-functionally, is in place, that leaders are role modeling collaboration, and that they're holding their organizations accountable for collaborating. And they also ensure that people at all levels of the organization understand how the business makes money. And that is that economic literacy. So really, all levels of the organization, regardless of what role, you really have a clear understanding of how the business runs and the impact that you have on helping the business be successful. And then in terms of opportunity, it's not just about the resources, it's also about ensuring that resources have the authority to make the decisions that they need, that clear boundaries are in place, and that people understand what their boundaries are, and that the processes and systems to support all of that are also in place. And then motivation, it's, are people getting recognized, rewarded? Are they getting feedback on a regular basis, and are there consequences, both positive and negative, that people are being held accountable for? Yep. Mm-hmm. I don't know what just happened there. Sorry about that. Oh, my little, very sensitive today. Okay, here we go. So let's talk about how DeCon impacts teams. So when direction is not in place, people are confused. And they often, when we go into an organization and we're doing an assessment around DeCon, we hear people use words like chaos, it's a grind, people are burnout, we're confused, too many priorities. That's an indicator to us that there's a gap regarding direction. If competence is not in place, so if people don't have the skills, the technical knowledge and experience, you put the organization at high risk for not being able to accomplish what you need to accomplish. If people don't feel like they have the tools and the resources and the authorities, they're going to get frustrated. And if people aren't motivated, so if they aren't getting that feedback, if they aren't being held accountable, you tend to see, low levels of engagement, morale, and ultimately people leaving the organization. So that's why having all four of those components in place is really critical. Now, going back to this conference that I shared with you earlier that I spoke at a couple of weeks ago, we asked them another polling question, and we said, what DeCon component do you feel is the strongest in your organization? And 46% of the participants said that they felt competence was the strongest. And this is pretty common. We do see this in many organizations. We work in, across industries, but industries like financial services, oil and gas, pharmaceutical and healthcare, hiring very intelligent, top-notch people, and so competence tends to be, one of the components that is very strong. When we ask them the question of which DeCon component do you feel is the weakest in your organization, there is a little bit more of a spread. So about a third for direction, a third said direction and motivation were the weakest, and a little less than that said opportunity was the weakest. Typically what we see there is that, with opportunity, it's really focused on people don't feel like they have a sufficient amount of resources, or they don't feel like they have that decision-making authority. We run this DeCon assessment across organizations and also as part of our Q4 leadership assessment, and just some general findings to share with you. Typically what we find is that leaders tend to rate themselves higher than other stakeholder groups, like their direct reports, their peers, in the areas of competence and motivation. So they think that they're doing a better job They perceive themselves as doing a better job than others perceive them to be doing. In addition, bosses of leaders tend to rate leaders lower in areas like motivation, what they're doing to improve themselves and their leadership skills, and holding themselves and others accountable. I just think that's some interesting information to think about with regard to your own leadership. So let's talk about a few things that you can do as leaders in each of the DeCon components to really strengthen your own leadership of your teams. With regard to direction, obviously providing clear direction and that constant prioritization and reprioritization is really important. Having regular discussions with your team about what the priorities are and when adjustments are made, communicating to the team on, why those adjustments were made and what types of things they should be focusing on now. And being very specific with people, really pinpointing what you need people to do. A lot of times leaders make assumptions that they've told that people are clear on what they're supposed to be doing and what the expectations are, but that's not always the case. So make sure that you're really being very specific and that you're having those conversations regularly and that you're also monitoring, measuring, and adjusting where you need to. With regard to competence, you really need to make sure that people have what they need knowledge-wise to do the work. And so that requires some conversations with your employees, asking what support they need, asking them, do they feel that they have all of the information and tools that they need to get done what you're asking them to do. And then really being a role model yourself for collaboration. And collaboration is absolutely critical in today's business world. I mean, business really can't get done without it. And so it's important for leaders to ensure that they are showing their teams how they collaborate with people in other functions, with their peers in other functions, and that they're also holding themselves and their team members accountable for partnering and including other functions when they need to. Opportunity, going to a lot of organizations, and I think it's kind of like your house, how you accumulate a lot of stuff over the years. The same thing happens in companies, right? A lot of tools, a lot of different systems and processes and things get accumulated, and then people get overwhelmed. And so I would say it's time to kind of clear out all the junk and focus on what are the minimum and most critical tools and systems that people really need in order to be able to get their work done. So as a leader, trying to simplify for your people and make sure that those things are streamlined, easily accessible, and people know have what they need, but in a systematic type of way. And then also removing obstacles. And this is another great question to ask your team in general in your team meetings, but also in your individual meetings about, what types of obstacles or barriers are they experiencing when trying to get their work done? And what might you be able to do to help to either identify them or remove them? And then really just have regular discussions about, performance, performance at the corporate level, performance at the functional level, and performance at the team level, so that they're fully aware of what's going on, across the organization, up, down, and sideways. And then with regard to motivation, really providing database feedback. I will tell you, feedback is still, to this day, one of the biggest gaps that we hear about with regard to leaders and in organizations. Over the past few years, a lot of organizations have moved away from the more traditional performance management processes. They're moving towards having, more frequent discussions with their employees around their own, around their performance. But employees still feel like they're not getting the feedback that they need. And so, being very pinpointed in that feedback, considering the individual preferences, with the way people like to receive feedback are all really important things for leaders to do. And then making sure that you're setting expectations and accountabilities for when you need people to do things differently. So it really means going beyond just telling people what they need to do differently, but also having discussions with them about what that takes and how they're going to be held accountable for implementing those new behaviors. And then aligning the direction with the motivation. This really needs to be a continuous feedback loop. So when you give direction, making sure that you're following up by providing feedback, recognizing employees for when they're following direction and expectations, and just having that continuous loop around direction and motivation can really be very impactful. So to wrap up today, I would say, as leaders, I'll leave you with a few questions to kind of ponder after this discussion. One is, asking yourself, does your team feel supported and valued? The second would be, am I providing, as a leader, am I providing the right balance between results focus and engagement? And then the third would be, what can I change or do differently to spend more time upfront so that I can save myself time later? And with that, I want to thank you for joining us for this webinar today, and also open it up for any questions or comments that you may have.
So Kim, there was a question that came in regards to becoming a Q4 leader. What is the average time for a leader to transition from Q2 or Q3 to a Q4 leader?
Oh, wow. I wish we had the magic pill for that answer. Because what I would say is, it depends. I hate to answer it that way, but that is the truth, right? And it depends on, I think, a couple of things. One is, it depends on the individual leader themselves and how willing they are to actually make the change needed. It also depends on the culture of the organization and how significant of a change this is going to be. And I would say the third thing is, it depends on what support that leader is going to be provided to make that change. And I would say that it's going to be really difficult if there's little to no support provided. The leader needs to have mechanisms in place from their own leadership, from the culture, and maybe even from external support to help guide them through that process. So it's not, there's no magic pill, it's not an overnight. It really depends on those things, but it does take time to change people's behavior, depending on how significant the behavior change is.
Thanks, Kim. You still have time if anyone has any questions. You still have time to either chat or place them in the Q&A feature. The last question that we've received is, the DeCon data showed direction and motivation as the weakest. And then you mentioned to align the direction and motivation. Can you share a few examples of what this might look like?
Sure. I mean, I think, the easiest thing is, is when you're setting expectations, or when you've set expectations, whether you go through some goal setting process, objective setting process, whatever it is that you do, is then making sure that in your conversations that you're having with your team members, when you're reviewing those, you're providing that feedback that's directly linked to the expectations that you set. So often what we find is there's a disconnect between that. So the expectations aren't clear, and then the feedback that's provided is not aligned back to those expectations, and the individual just gets confused and is not really sure, what exactly they should be doing. So I think that the clearer and tighter you can make those expectations, and then making sure during each conversation you're having with the individual, there's some connection back to that. You know, catching people when they're doing something in the moment, right? Providing that immediate data-based feedback, things like that, so that, again, it creates that continuous feedback loop that I talked about earlier, are the types of things that really help to ensure that D&M are aligned.
Good. Thank you, Kim. So if there are no further questions, we want to thank you for joining us today. Please know that if a question comes into your mind as you think about today's presentation, or if you look at the recording that you're going to receive and have a question, don't hesitate to send an email to Kim or to us through our website, and we'll be happy to answer any of those questions. So again, thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.